So the verse we're looking at this morning is going to be Proverbs 10:10. Alex read the whole section for us a moment ago, but I want us to read the primary verse, and let's read it together. So get out your collection card. Those who wink an eye bring trouble. Those who speak foolishly are ruined. Proverbs 10:10. Craig had seen the very same lady in the very same black 2013, I think it was a 2013 BMW, pull the same stunt before. You're aware of the situation in the parking lot at the Laveen post office, right? How crowded it can get in there. Well, this lady pulled into the lot, and as it happened, there were two cars right next to each other who pulled out at the same time. And as she pulled in, she took both slots in her shiny black 2013 BMW. That is, she straddled the middle line with her shiny Beamer, and she took two parking spaces. Now, Craig, who lives down La Mirada, which is a few blocks to the west of the Johnsons, just down that way. His house actually backs up to the house where Kim and Corey live, but that's a different story. Corny, yeah, Kim and Corny. And Craig is a shift manager at one of the restaurants that's at 51st Avenue and Baseline. And he walks to work most every day, even when it's a hot day. And on the way to work, he stops at the post office to pick up the mail out of their postal box, because sometimes when he gets off work, it's still a little bit late, and they close up the post office lobby, and he can't get in there to get his mail. So he goes by there about the same time every day, and he has noticed this very attractive lady who drives the BMW take a couple of spaces on more than one occasion. A couple occasions. And of course, there is a car line that goes out to the street. It's a line of which she seems to be totally oblivious. And this is the kind of thing that really steams Craig. Rich people in their show-off cars abusing ordinary people. So when he saw her pull into two spaces again last Monday, Craig decided that he should finally do something about it. No one had ever confronted this lady. She was too good looking, and nobody wants to burn their bridges with good looking people, so everyone just kind of lets her get away with it. And so as she came out of the post office on Monday with her arm full of mail, Craig, who is 25, stepped in front of her. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that you have taken two parking spaces, and only a moron could ignore the line that's going out of the parking lot." That's all he said. Simple words. And at first, this lady who was dressed the party looked a little bit shocked that there would be a stranger talking to her, especially talking to her that way. And she stopped in her path briefly, and she turned toward him with this kind of stone look in her eyes, and she just glared at him for about 18 seconds, he figured. And then she shifted the pile of mail that was in her right hand, she shifted it to her left hand, and then she raised her right hand toward him and dangled her middle finger in his face. Stepping to the left, she walked around Craig, she opened the car door, squeezed her tight little self into the Beamer, and pulled the door shut with a slam and a huff. She then hit the lock button. She turned on the engine to get the air conditioning going. And then as as Craig bravely stared her down, the woman in the black BMW started to sort through her mail. She opened 2 envelopes, peeked inside each one of the envelopes, but did not pull anything out of either one of them. She then took a cell phone from her purse and she slowly and methodically scrolled down the line, and she then punched it, and she called somebody, and she intentionally ignored him as he stood there glaring at her. And she just sat there chatting on the phone while she freshened up her makeup. All the while, Craig stood there and just gave her the eye. And the line of the cars out to the street did not seem to move. Craig grew even more furious, but he was running out of time because he had to time in on the register at work. And so in a huff, he dramatically threw his own arms up in the air, and he pivoted and walked off toward the street, and he began this brisk walk to work in the 102-degree heat. And the woman in the black BMW sat there victorious. Craig told me all about this when I went into his restaurant to get a taco. He wanted to know if I thought he had handled the situation well. This morning, we're going to be looking at a set of Proverbs which addresses this very situation and other situations of a very similar nature. Proverbs 10, 6 through 12 is another block of Proverbs that's arranged along the chiasmic structure, which I talked to you about a few weeks ago, although it's a very kind of a loose chiasmus. And I'm not going to try to unpack the structure this morning, but I want us to look at verse 10, which is the crux or the hinge of this chiasmic structure in that block of Proverbs. That is, everything in this block of Proverbs funnels into verse 10. Those who wink an eye bring trouble. Those who speak foolishly are ruined. Now, I realize that there are at least a couple of ways that this verse can be interpreted. And actually, a couple ways that this verse can be rendered and then interpreted and understood. For example, if you use the New Living Translation of the Bible, the wording there follows the Greek Septuagint as far as the translation goes. So it says, people who wink at wrong cause trouble, but a bold reproof promotes peace. However, the Common English Bible, the NIV, the English Standard Version, they follow the Masoretic Hebrew manuscript here. And I know it's a lot of technical information, but at least I want to make you aware that there's technical issues here. Now, this is a little sign that comes out. Please stand by for technical issues. But there's some technical issues here. But here is the Common English again. Those who wink an eye bring trouble. Those who speak foolishly are ruined. And that follows the Hebrew Masoretic text. Following the Septuagint, the Greek text, the second line contrasts winking at evil with the promotion of peace. But the Hebrew version compares winking at evil with ruining your life by speaking foolishly. And I'm actually inclined to follow the Hebrew textual tradition here. It seems to make the most sense in this overall context. So the first line is about turning a blind eye toward wrong, winking at it, nudge, nudge, allowing it to exist without any kind of challenge. In contrast, though, is the second line, the person who ruins his life with foolish talk. And I see that this proverb is actually highlighting the tension between saying too much and saying too little. The tension between saying too much and too little, that is, if you say too little, you allow evil to continue unchallenged, right? I was reading a story on Thursday about new research which shows that a third of all of the women in the world experience physical or sexual violence at some point in their lifetimes. A third. That's totally unacceptable. And it means that a lot of men are winking at violence in their villages, in their clans, in their tribes, in their families. We have not challenged it, and so the women suffer. Or what about human trafficking? Or what about racism? The racism that continues to haunt us. We said too little and we said it too late, and because it became so entrenched that even though we were eventually able to shift course on this issue, at least publicly, the generational ripple effect of racism continues down the line. The longer that evil is tolerated, the harder it is for us to throw it off. Or what about the systemic greed that drives our prosperity? Cheap goods at what cost to some poor person elsewhere in the world? Are we winking at these things and allowing them to ruin the lives of others through it? It's just the best we can do given the situation. Paul Larson, in his little commentary on Proverbs, calls this kind of winking leering silence. Leering silence. Silence in the face of evil is one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is foolish chatter in the face of evil. Foolish chatter in the face of evil. Perhaps we could call it the overreaction which forces unnecessary confrontation. It's foolishly, through our words, waving a red cloth in front of an enraged bull. On the one hand, you can wink at evil and let it go unchallenged, but on the other hand, you can speak foolishly against it. On the one hand, you feed evil if you keep your mouth shut, but on the other hand, you become a fool if you get carried away and you make a big scene through your endless pontificating and hyperbole about the evil of this and the evil of that. Yeah. In Matthew 10:16, Jesus noted the tension. He said, "Look, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as wise as snakes and as innocent as doves." Right? Or the ABP, Authorized Boydston paraphrase. "Hey, listen up. I'm sending you out to work among your enemies. So wise up and figure out how to get it all done by flying under the radar and get it done without losing your innocence in the process." That's the challenge. That's the tension. So how do we know when to speak in the face of evil and when to keep our mouths shut? Do we always challenge every selfish idiot who takes 2 precious parking spaces? Or do we let it slide sometimes? This is why we need wisdom, and we're not just talking about making peace in parking lots. Many of the issues are much greater than parking lot inconvenience. Some are even life and death issues. So where do we get the wisdom to handle this kind of tension of whether we say too much or say too little? And I want to suggest this morning that at least some of that wisdom is actually embedded in the Proverbs which funnel into verse 10, which surround verse 10. So there are 5 quick observations here. Number 1, aim for blessing rather than catharsis. Aim for blessing rather than catharsis. Catharsis is the purging of emotions, right? It's letting it all out. It's all that bottled frustration or hatred or whatever you've got tucked inside of there. And in therapy, it's important to encourage catharsis, to get everything out on the table so that those issues can actually be dealt with. But catharsis is really self-serving. It's always self-serving. It's not about blessing others, but about relieving self. And I want to suggest that we do not make wise decisions about responding even to injustice if we are responding out of personal catharsis. That easily leads to violence. Verse 6, blessings cover the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Verse 7, the memory of the righteous is a blessing. If you are aiming to bless those around you, rather than blow off accumulated steam, you will be in a better spot to discern when to speak up and when to say little or say nothing. Number 2, nurture the righteousness and innocence in your life. Nurture the righteousness and innocence in your life. Righteous means doing right, and extended out, it means the state of being of those who actually do the right. As Christians, we know that we have no real righteousness or genuine innocence of our own. Rather, if we've got it, it is because Christ has planted His righteousness, His innocence in us. And it must be out of that, His righteousness, His innocence, that we respond to these challenges. Verse 7 again, the memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked rots. Verse 9, those who walk in innocence walk with confidence, but those on crooked paths will be found out. It's very easy to jump all over the injustices out there and the wrongdoing of all of these other people, these evil people out there, but it's not so easy to maintain the righteousness and the innocence in our own lives. You remember that line from Hamlet? The lady doth protest too much, methinks. It means that we suspect those who passionately insist that something is supposed to be in a certain way, and we suspect that they are not giving us the full story. Passion is often a cover-up of our own shortcomings. These passionate outbursts are cover-ups of our own shortcomings. Do you ever get a sense that the people on these big crusades to clean up the evil in the world are actually hotbeds of evil themselves? At least we are not surprised when we find out that that's the case. We were not surprised by Jimmy Swaggart. We were not surprised by Jim and Tammy Baker or Ted Haggard or Lonnie Latham or Earl Polk and Mike Warnke and Bob Moorhead. The scandals that went with all of these guys. And I don't want to drag out all of the dirty laundry again. That's certainly not my point. Some of these people have actually gotten their acts together. Those that are still around, they've gotten their acts together and are living healthy and fruitful lives. But we can learn from their mistakes, and they would want us to learn from their mistakes. Some of these gifted people used by God in great ways were out on these crusades of some sort, crusades that they were using to draw attention away from their own lack of innocence. And ultimately, it all boomeranged on them. We've all had personal heroes, whether on the big stage or on the local little stage, who have been ungraciously unmasked, right? And that's what happens to us when we are quick to jump on the wrong of others without first checking ourselves. In Matthew 7, 1 through 5, Jesus said, "Don't judge so you won't be judged. You'll receive the same judgment you give. Whatever you deal out will be dealt out to you. Why do you see the splinter that's in your brother's or sister's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? Remember that the next time you feel like saying something snarky, even when it's appropriate. And another, yeah. How can you say to your brother or sister, let me take the splinter out of your eye when there's a log in your own eye? You deceive yourself. First, take the log out of your eye, then you'll see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye or sister's eye. You'll see clearly, you'll have the wisdom to discern how to do that. In other words, before you let loose with this volley criticizing the wrong of others, consider your own life. Sometimes the best way to stand up to evil is to live this alternative righteous life yourself. And at that point, anything that you might be led to say in the face of evil will have a higher level of credibility. And will obviously be growing out of a sense of genuine concern rather than out of some kind of judgmental attitude. People can read that stuff, and that affects how effective we are when we say something. Number 3, think it through. Think it through. Verse 8, the skilled mind. The skilled mind accepts commands, but a foolish talker is ruined. A thoughtful response to evil is better than a barrage of reactive words. Sometimes less is more. Fewer, more thought out words have 1,000 times greater impact than thousands of fighting words. The words that come out of our out of control emotions. Remember when you were young and you were taught to count to 10. Not just as a real young, but to count when you were taught as a child that you should not respond in anger, but you should stop and you should count to 10 before you say or do something. Right? Counting to 10, or maybe it's 100 or 1,000 or whatever it is for some of us, gives us time to reset our emotions and to actually think through the response to the problem, to calculate what we're doing, what you're doing. When you are led to respond to evil, give yourself time to think it through. What you're doing, what you are saying, and the tone in which you are saying it. A skilled mind is a great asset in exercising wisdom. Think it through first. 4th, develop mouth control now so you can appropriately respond later. Develop mouth control now so you can appropriately respond later. This is a recurring theme in Proverbs. So we are not surprised that here it pops up again. Note the second half of verse 6 again. But the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Then verse 11 echoes it. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Your mouth can either float you or sink you. You can use it to make peace or conceal the violence in your heart. And you can foster peace by developing the habit or the pattern of diplomatic peacemaking. Diplomatic peacemaking words. And it is a habit that has to be nurtured ahead of time in small, mundane matters. It has to be nurtured in the small and the mundane and the less significant before you can use it to confront the evil out there. And if you try to confront the evil out there, if you have not mastered your words in the small, the insignificant, and the mundane, it will blow up in your face. It will become violent. We learn to control our words through practice and through discipline. We practice silence even when it is not necessary for the moment. We stop and think about every little thing that we are going to respond to until we master the tongue. The goal is to become a person of fewer words, fewer better chosen words, so that you can bless someone with choice words at the critical moment. Well, let me say that again. The goal is to become a person with fewer, better chosen words so that you can bless someone with choice words at the critical moment. And I'm sure that this will surface again at some point in the Proverbs trek. Then finally, the fifth factor that helps us to discern to discern whether to speak up or to keep our mouth shut in any given moment, and that is, who wants to guess it? It's that single word there, the L word, love, right? Love. Am I intervening out of love, or am I intervening out of some kind of adrenal response, some kind of emotional response? My glands got the better of me, you know. Am I intervening out of this, or am I intervening out of love for somebody? Am I speaking up because I'm working out of the love that God has put in us when we accept His love, His loving kindness, His loving sacrifice, His mission of love, when we accept Him, the God who says that He is love, when we accept Him into our lives. So if we are operating out of godly love, then we are operating out of godliness, right? But if we are operating out of anything else, it's probably wise to keep our mouths shut. Verse 12. Hate stirs up conflict, but love covers all offenses. Hate stirs up conflict, but love covers all offenses. That is, when we are functioning out of love, we cut people a lot of slack. We're not quick to jump on them. And we are patient, and we are kind in the way that we do it. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. You know, I mean, you might think this is a wedding. It's not. This love section was not written for weddings. It was written for practical, everyday. Love is patient. Love is kind. It isn't jealous. It doesn't brag. It isn't arrogant. It isn't rude. It doesn't seek its own advantage. It isn't irritable. It doesn't keep a record of complaints. It isn't happy with injustice, but it is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. Love never fails. So here are the questions asked when trying to discern whether it is a moment for you to speak up or shut up. Number one, am I trying to bless or emote? Am I trying to bless or emote? Number two, does this flow from the innocence and righteousness in my own life? Does this flow from the innocence and righteousness in my own life? Number three, have I thought through what I'm saying, or am I just shooting off? Number four, is my mouth under control to speak up? And number five, am I speaking out of love? You want to hear the rest of the parking lot story? I knew you would. And I don't know if it actually helps in driving home the point of the proverb, or perhaps it makes the whole point of the proverb. I'll let you decide that. Well, here's the rest of the story, as I've been able to piece it together from those who were there longer than I was. Because I'm usually on my bike. When I'm at the post office, I'm usually in and out of there in a minute or maybe 2 minutes, regardless of the parking situation. You can avoid the parking chaos with a bike. Just kind of plant that idea in there. So about 45 seconds after Craig left, I'm hoofing it down toward work, and he was in a hurry. A white Ford Taurus that had been waiting to get into the post office, was stuck in the line out in the street waiting to get into the post office parking lot, got into the parking lot and stopped behind the black BMW that was taking 2 parking spaces. And the woman was still sitting in her car with the engine running, air conditioning going, and she was talking on her phone. And a balding middle-aged man stepped out of the Taurus. And I'll just kind of bunny trail here, note that balding middle-aged men are often heroes in my stories. Pretty soon they will be heroic senior citizens. The balding middle-aged man in the white Ford Taurus walked up to the driver's window where he gently tapped to get the attention of the woman. And at first the woman thought that it was Craig who had returned, and of course she didn't know his name was Craig, but I mean, she thought it was the other guy that had been talking to her before. Then she thought it must be some other deadly do-right vigilante who wanted to tell her how to park her car. And she pushed the button to lower the window, but only did it an inch. "What?" she said in kind of this harsh, snarky, nasal toned voice. "What?" "Ma'am," he replied with a voice trained to exude calm, "I couldn't help but notice that you had some trouble parking, and I'm wondering if everything's all right." Great, she thought, here we go again. And she unleashed a string of obscenities, which she summarized with the statement, "Mind your own blankety-blank business." "Well, actually," he replied, "it is my business. Don't you see how you're contributing to this traffic jam?" He pointed to a line of cars that were waiting to get into the parking lot. "This lot isn't big enough to begin with, and you're not helping matters." And she started in with the obscenities again, and then she shifted from park into reverse, turned her head to back up, and noticed his Ford Taurus blocking her exit. And there was a slight moment of panic in her mind, but it was not enough of a slight moment of panic to help her reason through the situation. "Move your blankety-blank old beat-up car, or I'm going to demolish it even more." And as she let loose with another set of obscenities, the man stepped back, and as he did so, the vocal woman noticed the gun. The gun holstered to his belt, and his right hand was resting on the butt of that gun. And with his left hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, a leather black wallety thingy which had a badge attached to it, which he dangled in front of her eyes for a long look. "Ma'am, I'm with the Postal Police and the Postal Inspection Service. Now I want you to turn off the engine, step out of your car, and up onto the walkway." She reluctantly complied because the balding, middle-aged man had a gun and a badge. Although she took her own sweet time getting out of her Beamer, and while she dilly-dallied her way from the car, the man took out his own phone and he made a quick call. And she walked in slow compliance motion to the walkway, and she stood with her arms defiantly crossed. It was less than a minute later that 2 Phoenix police officers on motorcycles with flashing lights, the same ones that had been running the speed trap on 51st Avenue, just a block north of the post office, zoomed into the parking lot, through the exit, and then up onto the walkway with their motorbikes. And they stopped no more than 10 feet from where the woman stood. They dismounted and just stood there, all looking official-like, as the plainclothes postal police officer stepped over to talk with her. He asked for and received her driver's license. He took out his little notebook and he began to write in it, "Ma'am, I noticed a couple of weeks ago when I was out here in Laveen that you had a similar parking problem. But you left before I could get over to talk with you about it. Then, when I was checking on you just a minute ago, you let loose with a mouthful of obscenities. What's going on here? What's with the attitude? This parking lot belongs to everybody, and it's not fair for one person to inconvenience everybody like this. Now, I could arrest you for obstructing the operation of the postal system and impound your car, and the chances are that you might not get it back. Dramatic pause. Or I could just write you an expensive parking citation. Paused again. Or I could send you on with a stern warning to join the human race, or else. I don't have time for the paperwork right now, so I'm just going to send you on your way. But if I ever see your car wrongly parked here again, I will have it towed, and I will make the time to do the arrest paperwork. Now, my two motorcycle friends here know who you are, and they know what kind of a person you are. So I'm sure that they will keep an eye out for you and your car as well. Mm-hmm. He returned her driver's license to her, turned, walked to his own car, moved it back so she could leave, and then parked it in one of the 2 spaces she quickly vacated. He spent a few moments thanking the Phoenix officers and inviting them to join him for breakfast at Kay's Cafe the next morning. That's where I heard them tell the rest of the story, more or less.